remember being in my 20s, I was in such a rush, and I don't know whose clock I was on. I mean, if I could talk to my younger self, I would suggest that there isn't really the rush that I thought there was.
I'm excited to have you here. I was doing a little bit of reading in your biography, and I am intrigued mostly by your passion for storytelling, as
Mm.
well as the spiritual side. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of. So just would love to just start this conversation off, if you would, by giving me a little background on kind of how you got here. Like, how did this version of you come to be, where now this is your story to tell?
Oh, thank you for asking. It is, it's funny because I think that we learn so much by storytelling. And I think of stories as being both those stories that we tell ourselves, right? I mean, we have kind of those beliefs or stories we're always telling ourselves. And then there's the stories that have been passed down to us, right? That have been told to us. And then the stories that we are sharing with others. And I think for me, it really has landed in this moment. I always tease myself that I am an experiential learner, meaning that I have to do things in order for it to really sink in. And oftentimes that means that I have to do things multiple times. So I feel like as a result, I have this tremendous, and I'm also just kind of one of those people who it's like, oh gosh, yes, that sounds like a great idea, right? And so I'll say yes more often than not. And a lot of times I haven't completely thought it through. So as a result, I feel like I have been gifted a kind of a multitude of experiences that I realize are I can share those, and I can share them in a way that hopefully kind of I don't know, illuminates things for other people. Maybe it makes people feel more comfortable. Just recognizing, I think that kind of the universal truths that we all experience, right? And how often times that in a kind of sharing of stories, so to speak, that we can really connect to each other on a level that um, really transcends kind of what we may assume or our insecurities or our kind of our need to present ourselves in a certain way, right? I mean, we can just get to a a more honest version of ourselves that is it it can be uncomfortable, but ultimately I think for me it just feels better.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to say about how relatable stories are. I think most people don't want to be lectured to. They don't want someone to sit there and tell them, hey, this is what you did wrong.
Right.
But most people are willing to sit and listen to a story. And I think as they consume that story, then it's almost natural to start to understand, hey, where does that story apply in my life? Or are there things that I'm listening to while you're telling the story that I find relatable or I can relate to? Because most people want to fit in, right? They want to find that
Oh,
place
yeah.
to relate to. And I
Yeah.
think the storytelling approach makes it very, again, just approachable for people to start hearing those things and then apply them internally without having to feel like they're being lectured to. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's so true. And I have been guilty of both. I am, I have three kids. A lot of times I know, or I think I know exactly. They're now young adults, and I think I know, what they should be doing, right? So I have definitely been guilty of, kind of doing the lecturing part, and I know that just. I mean, I can just watch them instantly glaze over, right, when I do that. So I do, again, that relatability, I think is you've hit, kind of one of the key features around storytelling. But I even want to pick up on that thread of belonging, because I think that is so, I mean, that has been a real through line for me, I feel like, is wanting a sense of belonging, and it's interesting because I also am very comfortable doing my own thing, and I'm an only child. I read a bunch. I have kind of, I rarely, I joke that the loneliest times, I mean, the times that I have found myself the most lonely is actually in relationship, as opposed to, I don't find myself being
Mm,
lonely when I'm alone. I like my own company. And I think, growing up, I think we moved by the time I was 12. I think I'd lived in like 8 different houses and or apartments. I'd gone to like 5 different schools. I felt like I was always the new kid, right? And so just yeah, that wanting to belong. And so I think that's probably another piece of why storytelling for me is so compelling, because it is that way to connect, to get that point of connection,
yeah.
and hearing from other people, their stories. And I'm always I'm always kind of, I love going into a room where I don't know anybody, and asking questions, and just finding those little moments where the other person, I mean, I particularly love it when they share with me a passion that they have. And I mean, it can be like button collecting, or I don't know, like building, you know balsa wood airplanes or something. I mean, something that is not necessarily a thing that I do. And when they're sharing something that is so close to their heart, how people just light up, and that is so attractive too, right? When we're in community with each other.
Yeah. Do you think your childhood experience of growing up as a single child influenced your decision to have multiple kids?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I It's funny because I loved being an only child. I was super clear. I mean, I probably around age 5, I realized that my parents were humans, meaning to say that I, yeah, that they weren't kind of the superheroes that I kind of wanted them to be. And so, as a result of knowing, kind of recognizing the humanness of my parents, I also realized very early on that being an only child was, I for the limited resources that were available, I it would have been really difficult if there were multitudes, if I had siblings. And so I was always really cognizant and thankful for that. And I think the only, it's funny. I've had so many different. I mean, my career path has been so varied and kind of this windy road. And I think the real thing that I was sure about, at least as a young person, is I wanted to be a parent. And I had 2 families that one family that I babysat for, and then another family that I was really good friends with, and they both had 4 children. And so I kind of, in my mind, 4 children was this perfect number. And turns out that 3 is the perfect number for me. And but and then also, it's so interesting having multiple children and not having siblings. And I mean, there's a couple of times when, we'd all get in the car, and they'd be like fighting for position in the car, who gets what seat, or the window, or this or that. And I remember being so exasperated sometimes. I'd be like, guys, we're all going to the same place. Like, does it really matter? And my kids would be like, you just don't understand. You don't have siblings. You don't know. And that's like, I don't. So I'm always kind of, and I'm also, I mean, talk about storytelling. The thing that I'm fascinated about with kind of family structures is I love this idea that each child is born into a new family, right? That there's this transformation that happens as a new another child joins the family, and then I remember being at a dinner party, and there was a guest there who was like one of 10, children, a big family, and it was so interesting listening to them talk about how varied the recollection was when the as adults the kids got back together, and they'd be talking about, oh, do you remember when we had that camping trip or whatever, and they were all there, and how different each person's recollection was. I mean, there were some commonalities, but then there was just kind of depending on what their age was or what they were, they all kind of had their own take on it.
Hmm. It's true. I think a lot about, there's this like expression that as new parents, you raise your first child together,
Hmm.
and then your second child you raise with your first child.
Hmm.
And the concept of like your first child teaches you how to be a parent. So you're really figuring out on the fly. And that first child has a lot of parenting tendencies in a lot of cases
Yeah.
where they're going to try and parent the second child because that's what they're used to.
Yeah.
And I see it, even in our kids. I have a slightly different relationship with my son who's older than my daughter. And obviously it's different between a son and a daughter, and there's some caring things that the daughter will do differently than the son, and there's some roughhousing things I'll do differently with my son. But there's a difference there, and I think it's not a bad thing. If you really
Oh,
embrace that growth aspect of it and you're like, hey, we're figuring this part out together. And I also think that there's a lot of honesty in saying, hey, your parents aren't perfect. We don't necessarily have all the answers. I'm not by any means saying you should make your kid your therapist. But
yeah.
I do think the realness of saying, hey, mom and dad don't necessarily have all of the answers, but here's what we do know, and just being honest with them through the rough parts, right? You should still maintain a very strong atmosphere, and make sure that they're comfortable and they're not worried that like, hey, mom and dad have no freaking clue what's going on.
Right.
But I do think a little bit of that honesty and saying like, hey, dad messed up, or such and such happened, where they understand that you guys are real humans and it's okay to be figuring it out as you go, because they need that, right? They're going to grow up and at one point need to figure it out as they grow, and if they don't see that example in their own house, how
Yeah.
will they know how to do it?
Oh, for sure. I think that you know modeling that you don't have all the answers and that you can be open about that is so important, right? And we just, it's complicated, right, to be a parent, because you bring so many kind of hopes and dreams, and you've got your own baggage of how your childhood was. I mean, baggage, I don't mean it necessarily in a negative context, but you just have your own set of experiences, right? And I do think the thing that I noticed, because I have two boys and a girl, is that, I mean, each one, I feel like from the moment that they were born, they were very clearly their own people, right? And I think that was kind of an interesting wake up for me, is to to shift into more of the mode of, hopefully, and certainly did not master this by any stretch, but I did attempt to just really allow for that child who was born to kind of develop into that person that they already they already were, right? I mean, just kind of allowing for their own individual growth, because I mean, I think that there's some hardwired gender differences too, but really just kind of each individual came out with such a distinct personality.
I do agree, and I think we sort of have to let go of this expectation that's going to look like we expect it to, right?
Hmm.
And I know at least the case for me is, as I was starting to figure out, hey, what does it look like to even be a parent? I'm trying to figure out, well, when my kid is 18 years old, what do I envision that kid is going to be like, right? And how do I start the process of helping them shape that? And somewhere along the way, you realize like you're not in charge of that, right?
Yeah.
You're not
Oh,
necessarily
yeah.
programming it. You're helping to guide them, right? And
Right.
there's some places where you need to give them some stern feedback, but really you're helping them to just have some guardrails to grow into who that they were called to be, not necessarily designed by you. And I think that's a hard part for a lot of people to grasp.
Oh, it is. And I think, I mean, as I really have shifted my thinking too over the years of really kind of viewing my role as, in many ways, kind of being that safe harbor, so to speak, right? Where the kids know that they can come, and that they continue to go out into the world, and you go out into the world, and you can kind of get knocked around a little bit, and you have that place that you can come back to, and even as my relationship changes with them being young adults now, still just wanting to be, I can't protect them from the storms, so to speak, right? But I can be there, and hopefully just give them a place to kind of be for a bit while they kind of get themselves back together, and are ready to go out in the world again.
Yeah. How much of that do you think comes down also to as adults, or at least grown kids, if you will? A lot of us don't necessarily have that figured out in the first place. Like I think a lot of us have not yet spent the time to understand who we were called to be by spiritual design and stepped into that. We are just sort of living this life that other people have told us, hey, you're supposed to do X, Y, and Z, not really stepped into our authentic self. And now those parents are raising another generation based on not even knowing who they are in the first place. Do you see any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I think that is so much about the work that I do now, whether it's um, with the Spaghetti on the Wall journal or the Discovering Your Spiritual Autobiography. Both of those, they're kind of in different ways, but they're really both getting at knowing yourself. I mean, getting curious, right? You have to start by actually being, wanting to be asked questions, right? And some people don't want to ask questions, and you know, that is just where they're at. However, I do think that there's, I think I mentioned in a in our conversation beforehand, or on the one of the emails, the wallpaper words, right? I have this. I really am such a, any time I teach a workshop or am facilitating a group, I like to do kind of drill down on different words, and because I think we have these words like success, or even, I don't know, abundance, or even authentic, right? I mean, we have these words that are just being used constantly and become these buzzwords in our culture, or just become, these words that we have a kind of cultural understanding of what their definitions are. However, are we really, I think each of these concepts are worth investigating what they mean for us, right? And so it's it and oftentimes we just don't take the time to do that. I mean, I remember being in my 20s, right when I graduated from college, and I just felt like I was in such a rush for some reason. It was funny. It just was, there was a sense that I had to, I, and I don't know whose clock I was on. I mean, or what was the thing that I was measuring against, but it was just this real sense of just, gosh, I have to catch up, right? Of always kind of being behind. And I mean, if I could talk to my younger self, I would suggest that there isn't really the rush that I thought there was, right? That there is, and that there's also value in taking time. And I think that goes back to this idea of being curious, right? And getting to know yourself and just being willing to, I don't know, being willing to say, is this really, does this, is this really in alignment with either who I think I am or who I want to be? Right?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And so you mentioned your program that you work through. Can you tell me a little bit about what that experience is like and some of the things that you see people transform through that process?
Yes. Thanks so much for asking. It brings me so much joy to be offering this workshop. It last year in the fall, I had recently I had completed a master's a few years ago, and I thought I was going to do something in um, academics. And so I completed the master's. And what I realized is I found myself being drawn back to small group workshops and small group leadership. And that's kind of where a lot of my coaching and practice came from. And many years ago, I was in with my local church. I led these covenant classes. And so those were classes for people who were kind of just, they were either new to the area or new to the church. And one of the activities we would do was a spiritual autobiography. And I always loved that activity. And so last fall, I found myself kind of a break in between projects, and I thought, I I think it's time to create a standalone curriculum around discovering your spiritual autobiography. So I put together an 8-week course, and it's designed to be in person. It's non-denominational. It's designed for about 6 to 12 people, ideally. And we meet once a week for, depending on the size of the group, we meet anywhere from like an hour to an hour and a half. And there are weekly there is homework. It's not that onerous, but it is the culmination is 1,000 to 1,500 word spiritual autobiography. And along the way, we do different writing exercises, and I do suggest to participants that they journal at the same time. And I do have journal prompts that I share with them. But I think the response has been a couple of things. It people are so people really want to share, and they want to connect. And in fact, the very first group back in January, I realized that I needed to reduce the amount of content that I was trying to deliver in each meeting, because people really were so full of stories that they wanted to share, that it I just kind of reduced the different exercises, and we just kind of do 2 exercises for each one. So there was that. And the other thing that has been really amazing and consistent with all the groups is the real gentleness and respect that each participant brings in terms of listening to the other participants, which, I mean, I think that we all are great at talking, right? And, but really listening. And I think that just touches my heart. So there's kind of that bigger piece that I've just been watching. And then I purposefully designed this to be 8 weeks because part of the intent was to build community. So I have watched groups where people who have participated in the 8 weeks have, gone on to exchange numbers and do stuff outside of the group, which I love too. And in the midst of it, with the different, exercises that we do, it's really allowing people to take time to ask themselves questions and and reflect on their experiences. And I mean, one of the exercises that we have is depending on if you're over 40, I have you do it by decades, like 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and so on. If you're younger than 40, that I suggest by fives. And you just kind of you kind of create a sheet of paper, and you make these, depending on your age, you kind of set out these different blocks with just lines, and you kind of just do a brain dump of stuff that comes up that goes into those different time frames. And it's a great way to retrieve memory because you've removed kind of the traditional way that we try to recall different memories by going chronologically, right? So it's just kind of, it allows for essentially a free flow of memories. And I love one of the times that I did it recently, because I participate with my groups when I'm doing these, is what I realized is I found a pattern of of when my different friendships had formed. And so and just and so that was one thing that came up. It was like, oh gosh, there was this core group of friends that I still have that was, kind of in that middle school, high school time. Then there was that core group of, work related friends. And so, I mean, even reflecting on that, it brought forth just more awareness and nuance that was, I don't know if I'm completely articulating it that well, but I just had never thought about it in that way.
Yeah, I think, you bring up a good point there. There's a tremendous amount of value in knowing yourself first, right? Because, I think especially when you talk about most of the people are really just wanting to speak instead of listen, it really makes me think about those people are mostly looking for this place to feel heard, seen, loved, and appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of them, because they don't necessarily feel that, they don't necessarily know who they are authentically, they're looking for that validation externally.
Yeah.
And I think when you go through a process like that and you understand who your authentic self is, right? Understand your story from a 10,000-foot view where you can really zoom out and say, oh, that actually is me. I see these patterns. It gives you a little bit of that ability to not have to speak when you're in a conversation because you're okay with who you are. You don't need
Yeah.
to just dump out on somebody else because you're comfortable. You're already feeling heard, and it
Yeah.
kind of gives you that space to listen to somebody else. And I think that that allows you to build those deeper relationships and let other people go through that process where now they can feel heard, they can feel that space and grace that they need to start that level of transformation for themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's and the and then it's also it's interesting because I've led the group through I've led the group at churches, so you know you kind of have a common understanding at least of religious beliefs. As I mentioned, it's not it's a non-denominational workshop, and it's and I do not have a point of view that I'm putting forth. I generally the way I describe it is that I think it's probably an interesting workshop for anyone who believes in something bigger than themselves. You know, without to, and I don't presume to name what that is for anyone else. And so I think that both and then also leading it in, you know, community centers and with groups that come from a variety of backgrounds has been really interesting. Just recognizing, I mean, one of the first things that we do is we talk about, we talk about kind of the differences between maybe what our religious beliefs are and our spirituality. For some people, that's hand in glove, and for other people, it's very distinct. And we even I even before that ask people to reflect on their basically inherited beliefs and their acquired beliefs, whether that's within a religious tradition or not. And so it's I think that both like knowing yourself and being having the ability to reflect on different points in your time and different points of time in your life also allows, and again you were saying kind of that zooming in and zooming out, and I think about how, again, when you were saying, you know, just the people that we just get going and we're not even really paying attention to things, that whether we're paying attention or not, my belief system is that there is there is a bigger, you know, divinity, and it is present for us at any time, and it is in it's a lot more obvious in the times when we can be quiet and still and silent, and but yet, I mean, in my belief system, we um, we are we are held in, I believe, kindness and love.
Where does that belief system come from for you? Like, was that a thing that was always present, or did that come from a period of feeling maybe disconnected that you went through that transformative journey and then found connection, on purpose?
I think it's interesting because just recently I was writing a new current version of my spiritual autobiography, and I was really reflecting on the there was always a belief that there was something bigger. And I think, and as I mentioned, being an only child and reading a lot, I mean, my imagination was already receptive to um, thinking about things that I couldn't necessarily, you know, touch or feel or see, right? Or and so I think that having that predisposition to having kind of a big imagination, that it was easy for me to um, have a belief in, especially because I think of like God or Jesus and Mary and the disciples, and of being kind of characters, right? So it was very it wasn't a stretch for me to kind of see these characters and think about the stories. And I will say that there has been, I think the biggest transformation has actually been from belief into faith. And meaning that for me, my faith is faceless. My faith is not related to a particular um, liturgy or religious tradition even, and it's really in my faith where I have found such peace. It's and it's but it has been, I can't, I was reflecting on this just last week. I can't really pinpoint that moment when I feel like kind of maybe it was just, you know, I kind of emotional or just not even emotional, because it's more than that. It's just kind of a maturation, I guess. But yeah, the transformation from belief to faith.
Mm. Do you have those sort of same journeys with the people you work with? I mean, really the root of what I'm asking there is, does someone need to have had that transformation first to really deepen their faith, or is that something that really happens through the process? At least for me, it's been a journey, right? I've never had this one particular moment where it was like non-believer, believer, everything is peachy keen.
Right.
But you have these little moments in between where it's like, damn, reinforcement, right? You get that
Mm-hmm.
holy cow moment. And I think as you continue to have those, it becomes, I don't know if I want to say easier, but more natural to keep that belief going and deepen your faith. So really what I'm asking there is for someone who is maybe at a spot where they don't have that deep of belief yet, or where they're really just exploring, hey, what do I even believe? Is that person someone who starts this and figures out, yeah, this makes sense to me, I can continue to go further through this journey?
Um, I have had participants have that have been on either end of the kind of the spectrum, let's say. I mean, I it's interesting because I have had people who I feel like the process really affords them a an enlightenment of sorts, right? Let's say that. And then I have had participants who are even I mean, I'm smiling because this is why I love this work so much. Is I've had participants who, despite the stories that they share, that are kind of tremendously wonderful stories of kindness and grace and forgiveness, are still completely resistant to the idea of a a god or even a benevolent universe. And yeah, and you know, I just feel like my job is I give the space, and you know, I we create this really sacred time. You know, I when we do the first the very first week, we do group agreements, and one of the group agreements that I strongly encourage all groups to adhere to is confidentiality, so that you know, people do feel like they have the room to be vulnerable. But yeah, so I feel like I'm providing a space to meet people where they are. And if in the process, there is kind of some deepening of an understanding that they have, that's great. And then there are some folks who just, they're probably gonna, I feel like, will remain in, it's kind of like part of their, it's funny, it's like almost part of their practice is this this confrontational style with their beliefs.
Mm. What I'm hearing here is everyone's journey is different, and we can't walk into it with an expectation of what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And I think we can relate it back to what we started talking about with children, where you know you have this sort of expectation that this is what this child is supposed to be. And I think that that relates very strongly here to what your faith walk is like. You know, you can't necessarily say this is exactly what it's supposed to look and feel like. It's going to be unique for you. It's going to start at a
Yeah.
different time. It's going to have a very different feeling, and your relationship with God, or whatever higher power you necessarily want to call it, we'll call it God, is unique to you. It's a relationship. And much like the relationship I have with my own father is very similar to the relationship I have with my spiritual father, right? They're a relationship, and those are unique to you. So I think what I'm really hearing here is it's about having that space where you can have those sort of guardrails to know, hey, let's stay in this general area. Like
Yeah.
there's some rules, right? They wrote a book on it, for how you're supposed to have this relationship, and how to start
Yeah.
seeking it. And you know, you build that relationship step by step, and it is a process, but it's not going to look like yours. It's not going to look like mine. It's going to look like whatever is unique to you, that, you know, the listener of this episode right now, it's going to be a very unique journey and a unique relationship. And I think you have to step into that and not worry about comparing it to someone else's, or, hey, is it the right time? Does it feel the same? Does it look the same? It's yours.
Yeah.
And what you need to do there is really just step into that, and own it and appreciate it for what it is, and understand that it's a thing that's going to grow with you for the rest of your life. It's only going to get more clear, it's going to get deeper, it's going to get more meaningful as that goes on. But it does require you to opt in, if you will, right? You can't be a
Yeah.
passive participant in that.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, you know, it's I was thinking about, I was writing this morning about change, and just that I think that one of the scariest aspects about change is that it it begins to, it's kind of like throwing a rock into a pond, right? There's going to be those ripples, particularly ripples within your relationships with other people, your friends, your family, your loved ones. And so even even if you think about applying that same idea of change within your relationship to God, or you, whatever your belief system is, um, that is, you know, there's going to be ripples and discomfort, and there's going to be some unknown, right? And I think that that's also where people can get stuck. I mean, I can think of many times in my own life where, I was knew I was miserable for whatever reason, and so resistant to change, right? Because it's just like, oh gosh, at least the miserable is familiar, and the change is unknown. And I think that, there is a, um, I think about when I find myself, if I praying and just saying, okay, I don't have, I don't know where to go from here, right? I mean, it's whatever if I've got a tough situation, and being willing to hand that over to my higher power. Um, that's something I've had to learn to do over time, because that was a change in my relationship to, I mean, I think of my prayers as a little girl, right? I mean, so transactional, right? I'll do this and then I can get this, right? And that was, and so, just changing and growing into a more faith-based, spirituality, where I'm saying, gosh, I need some help here, and I don't really know what it looks like. I mean, that requires a change in my thinking, and also, is can be uncomfortable, because I'm stepping into the unknown.
I agree. Well, I want to thank you for this conversation as we kind of draw to a close here.
Yeah.
Where can people follow up with you?
Well, you can find everything we talked about on kristanswan.com, and that's probably easy place. And I'm on LinkedIn too, but kristanswan.com.
Perfect. Well, again, I tremendously appreciate it, and
Thank
thank you for
you.
your time.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Before you go, can I pray for you? Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to sit together with our guest, Kristan. I want to thank you for the person on the other side of this podcast, for covering them in grace and space that they need to step into their authentic self. And I ask that you continue to bless this person, that you watch over them and dispatch angels in their life to help guide them to who they are called to be. I ask that you continue to shine a light on who that person is, that you give them the courage to step into that version of themselves that they know that they are called to be, and that they boldly, boldly step into that life that you've designed for them. They are called for greatness in your image. And Father God, I just ask that you continue to bless them and show them that where they continue to be obedient, they will be blessed highly in return, and more than they could ever ask for, and greater than they could ever possibly imagine. But it's going to require them to take that step. And I ask that you continue to give us the courage to continue to do that and pursue the life that you've designed us to live. Father, I ask all these things in your name. Amen. I love you.